The release of Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 on Nintendo Switch brought a pair of fantastic games to a new audience. The titles sent Mario through the boundless creativity of space, paired with beautiful orchestral and synthesized music. The Switch releases play great and look sharp, but at higher resolutions, the graphics have a few blemishes. Distant single stars will multiply into 4. Subtle bounces of light turn into a kaleidoscope of light, and distant galaxies drift into double vision. When video games are made for consoles, designers are typically targeting a fixed platform. A machine has a certain spec of hardware with certain resolution outputs. The artists and programmers are expecting to target a specific machine. Super Mario Galaxy 2 was created for the Wii, rendering in 480p. The re-release targets a much higher 4K resolution on Switch 2. Many textures and 2D elements have been updated for the increased resolution, but effects such as the blur appear broken. In order to produce this blurring effect, the Wii goes through a few steps. First, it captures 3D geometry and a depth map. The 3D geometry is a raw image with nothing applied on top of it. The objects in the background are crystal clear. Next, it takes the 3D geometry picture, shrinks it to quarter scale, and applies the special effect to the entire image. In this case, the effect is taking the original image and layering 4 transparent copies that are pushed in different directions. This creates the blurring effect, but it's applied to the entire image. Now, everything is blurry. Using the depth map, a mask can be made, cutting out portions of the screen where the effect shouldn't apply. Paste it together, apply the HUD, and the image is ready to show on the screen. This happens 60 times per second. That's pretty efficient. The effect is neat, giving more focus on the foreground. Now, when it comes time for Switch 2 to render the game at 6 times the scale of the original, it needs to perform the same operation. It captures 3D geometry and a depth map. It scales the picture of 3D geometry to quarter scale and applies the special effect to the entire image. And this is where the issue lies. A quarter scale of the 3D geometry image is way larger than the Wii's intended resolution. When the effect is computed, the transparent layers are out of the original alignment. As the resolution gets higher and higher, the multiplication done to the positioning drifts further and further out of place. Thus, background elements appear to have double vision, destroying the original effect. This effect can be seen scaling in various resolutions, depending on how the game is played. The Switch 1's 720p handheld screen isn't so bad, but the Switch 2's docked 4K experience drifts apart. The geometry may look gorgeous in higher resolutions, but the messy post-processing is less than desired. There is a fix, however. By capturing the 3D geometry and depth map at the original resolution, the effect can be applied at the original resolution. This can be layered onto a 4K image. Now, background objects have the proper effect applied, without double vision. There is a caveat to this. With the effect being drawn at the original resolution and overlaid onto a bigger image, obvious, chunky pixelation from the mask cutout appears. This effect, under the original artist's intention, was created only to work with a 480p resolution. The differences most harshly affect the second game, whereas the first one isn't so bad. With the release of Super Mario 3D All-Stars in 2020, the post-processing effect was adjusted for higher resolutions. It's an updated calculation compared to the straight-scale solution that Galaxy 2 uses. The effect itself was updated, and marginally scales with resolution. It isn't the exact same as Wii, but the artist's concept of blurring is retained. More modern games aren't immune from resolution adjustments. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening has some technical hiccups on the original Switch. Loading new areas can cause drops in frame rate. Over on Switch 2, this issue is completely resolved. The upgrade to Switch 2 also enhances the resolution. The original Switch averaged around 720p. Nintendo Switch 2 presents a clearer 1620p average. It looks sharp, though it seems the tilt-shift effect has been altered. Compared to Switch 1, it isn't as strong. This may take away from the artist's original intention. The world might not appear as miniature or dreamlike. Depth of field still exists on Switch 2, but it's much more subtle. On the opposite end, Switch 1 in handheld mode has a lower resolution. This is where the post-processing effect is strongest, perhaps a little too strong. It's a minor detail, but the intensity was originally created for Switch 1 hardware, resembling a diorama. Higher resolutions start to pare that away. This isn't a PC game where graphical settings can be easily tweaked. The post-processing is intended for one target hardware line. Super Mario 3D World was ported from Wii U to Switch, alongside a variety of changes to gameplay and movement. The game was bumped up from 720p to a dynamic 1080p. In the transition, effects were altered. Switch 2 increases the resolution, further diminishing the blur. Going back to Wii U, the focal point is strong. Sometimes it's better to keep a certain resolution to retain a specific effect. At least one effect appears unchanged. Mirror surfaces in 3D World represent a blurred, opposing camera angle. Between Switch 1 and 2, the mirror's resolution remains the same. It holds the exact same effect, despite the main 3D geometry being rendered at different scales. The function tied to the camera's rendering resolution wasn't updated for Switch 2. It remains fixed in place, set separate from the full rendering resolution. On Wii U, the resolution was set a little bit lower. In all cases, the mirror provides a blurred, glossy look. It might be strange to have a pin-sharp specular reflection. The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword makes complex use of the embedded frame buffer to achieve its painterly effect. It was created while targeting the Wii's limited pixel count, tastefully masking distant objects. An HD remaster was released on Switch, touching up many textures and greatly enhancing the visuals. It broke free from the Wii's image limitations, adapting the game for full HD. In the transition, the watercolor effect appears quite different. It isn't as strong anymore, losing some of the original's visual identity. Z-target fights don't hold as tight of a focal effect. Taking a note from earlier, I'll scale the original Wii version while retaining the frame buffer's original resolution. Objects in the foreground look fine, but anything masked by the effect presents in a blocky, low resolution. The solution for Mario Galaxy 2 doesn't make sense here. Simply scaling both the resolution and frame buffer presents something a lot closer to the Wii. This was the approach used for Super Mario Galaxy 2 on Switch, but compared with Skyward Sword HD, the effect is quite different. The intensity isn't as strongly tied to the resolution. Higher resolutions, such as 8K, not seen in the HD remaster, reveal a bit of double vision. Compared with 480p, the positioning seems faithful to the original and isn't drifting out of place. The effect isn't damaged in scaling. Still, the Switch has a different look. A deliberate choice was made in the remastering process to dial back the watercolor look. It wasn't just a simple upscale. In this case, The original visual identity was born of technical limitations. With those limitations removed, the new artists decided to adjust the look. Early polygonal 3D games seemed to take the brunt of upscaling troubles. Final Fantasy VII was crafted for 240p output on the PlayStation 1. It uses bitmaps to create high-detail backgrounds. Real-time polygonal characters are layered into the scene. The game has seen re-releases time and time again for modern platforms with various enhancements. 3D geometry can be easily scaled to different resolutions. Polygons or shapes are mathematical positions between points. A line can be drawn between connected points and can easily scale in size. A bitmap is a grid of pixels. These are set colors plotted into integer positions. It's an image file. Bitmaps can be upscaled, but no additional visual information is added in the process. Pictures can appear blocky or blurry, depending on the technique used. Final Fantasy VII uses pre-rendered backgrounds, plotted for a 240p grid. While 3D geometry can be cleanly upscaled, the bitmap background cannot. On Switch, the game renders at a filtered 720p. Backgrounds use a bilinear upscale that enlarge and blur the backgrounds, while sharp 3D models render on top of it. It creates contrast where the characters don't appear to be part of the scene. The original intention was to convince players that the characters were exploring a highly detailed world, rather than pieces moving around on a Monopoly board. Later on, the open world uses a different approach, where the environment itself is created from geometry. This is able to scale cleanly to higher resolutions due to its real-time calculation of shapes and lines. Other games would follow this route, such as Super Mario 64. The world is created from 3D geometry and can scale to various resolutions. The only tricky part is the HUD elements and 2D objects, like trees, which are created from bitmaps. These can be scaled in various ways, and the approach that Nintendo Classics uses is a bit messy. Other games feature blurry HUD elements that don't mesh well with sharper 3D geometry. Some of this is due to the emulation scaling method, but it also has to do with the increased resolution. The models and worlds were intended to be seen in a lower resolution, alongside appropriate size HUD elements. Ridge Racer for the Namco System 22 is a fast, fun, and impressive racing game. It renders in 480p at a smooth 60 frames per second. With its addition to the Arcade Archive series, emulation brought the game to modern platforms. In this approach, the game renders 3D elements with its original resolution, and then uses integer scaling to fill the screen. The game looks crisp, with the HUD elements properly blending in with the 3D geometry. This follows the artist's original intention when designing the display. It might not be as pretty as other games, but it's a crisp format that works flawlessly. The original rendering resolution, integer scaled for a modern display. As technology advances, efforts are made to get old games looking better on new platforms. Some things are lost in translation, altering the originally intended experience. But I'd be remiss to say games didn't look better with higher rendering resolutions. Super Mario Galaxy in 4K is so good.